Hi, I'm Kalasi, and today, in celebration of Suno Pitokipona, I have prepared an overview of something I have been working on and off on for the past year. A fair warning ahead of time, I will delve deeper into more technical topics that are not for a casual audience. So if at some point you start feeling like this has gotten too deep into the weeds, yeah, that's likely because it has. Still, I will also try to make this as approachable as possible for someone who is only interested in the Tokipona side of things. So what is it that I've done exactly? Well, in short, I've made a new dictionary for Tokipona called Linku. It does not do anything revolutionary when it comes to word definitions. In fact, those are mostly inherited from previous dictionaries. Instead, it adds some important infrastructure to make the dictionary as feature-packed as possible while making it easy for other people to contribute and use it in their own projects. The dictionary can be accessed as JSON, a web page, or via a new Discord bot. But before I get to describing my own project, I feel like I need to justify its existence in the first place. Tokipona truly has an abundance of dictionaries, too many even. If you go to the GitHub topic for Tokipona and just flip through the pages, you will be hard-pressed to find one that doesn't list at least one independently made dictionary somewhere. What could I possibly bring to the party that hasn't already been done? The thing is, despite the apparent abundance, most of these dictionaries are rather similar and share most of each other's flaws. The vast majority are closely derived from the so-called classic word list, which has some peculiarities. Here are some common motifs from this family of dictionaries. Content words are listed as having a particular part of speech. Maybe you will find etymologies or sitelantpona, or maybe you won't. You might stumble on obsolete words with no mention that they're no longer in use. Or conversely, you might miss out on some common pre-poo words, or if you're unlucky, the dictionary might even predate poo, and then it might even leave out some words like ban and alasa, which are obviously in use by pretty much everyone. And when it comes to post-poo words, they will most likely not be there, or at best they will be handpicked by the author. Of course, handpicking also means that switching from one such dictionary to another, you might find a random word missing or a new random word popping up. In other words, such word lists are more reflective of Tokipona's early years as well as poo times, rather than any more recent developments. Also, since they are independently made and hosted, it is highly unlikely that most of them will actually receive updates to be more in line with modern Tokipona. So now let's look at some more recent notable dictionaries. Nimialepona is a dictionary by Jan Inwin that was started in 2019 in Mapona and immediately broke with the traditional dictionaries by not arbitrarily leaving out non-poo words. Being one of the first to actually document all the words that are or were actively being used by the community, Nimialepona became a very useful resource and quickly grew in popularity. It probably also helped that its creation and updates coincided with the rapid growth of Mapona in 2020. One problem of Nimialepona, or feature depending on how you look at it, is how it blurs the line between genuine words in common usage and one-off jokes and thought experiments. You can still indirectly tell where the word lies on the spectrum by looking at the time frame it was coined in, whether or not it is poo, and generally how vague or precise it is. Nevertheless, newcomers may find themselves using jokes and experimental words as if they were commonly accepted. To counteract this, more recent editions of Nimialepona move the especially underused words into a separate tab, but that is still more of a band-aid than a perfect solution. On the topic of Nimialepona, Nimialepiku is a fork of Nimialepona made by Kapesipake. It is notable for being the first dictionary to both document many non-poo words and onboard multiple translators. As of June 2022, it was available in 13 languages, compared to just 3 for Nimialepona. One issue that was specific to Nimialepiku, which it didn't share with its predecessor, was its decision to exclude poo words altogether. This is fine if you just want to list nimisins, but as a newcomer you can't just use this dictionary alone. However, this dictionary is no longer available online for reasons I will touch on later. The last dictionary I want to mention is Ku. This second book by Jan Sonia is, much like Nimialepona, an attempt to document Tokipona as it is spoken rather than relying on the classic word list. However, the two projects had rather different focuses. Whereas Nimialepona tried to document words that passed some subjective criteria of notability, Ku instead works in terms of translations. The source material for Nimialepona is editorial opinion, while Ku uses the results of questionnaires Jan Sonia made in Mapona from November 2020 to April 2021, which are, on some level, objective truth. The release of Ku also provided the community with a nice and simple way to rank words based on their popularity. which Nimia Lepona could not do that well. However, it is important to remember Ku has its own problems that stop it from effectively replacing Nimia Lepona. Since Ku data was collected in one relatively narrow time frame, it overrepresents words that happened to be popular at the time. It also cannot include new words, since that would essentially require publishing a whole new book, nor can it be sensibly translated to other languages. There are also some flaws with Jansonia's methodology, which meant that some Nimicines were overrepresented in translation. This is fine for what Ku intends to be, but it messes with the rankings of Nimicines and casts doubt on their cutoff points. Another issue, which in my opinion applies to all the dictionaries above, is that they all have to draw the line somewhere. They are all designed to be easily browsed, and humans don't like clutter, so some non-essential features such as audio or sitelen or glyph etymology may be excluded even if the information is available elsewhere in the community. They may also be limited by the medium in which they exist. Google Sheets cannot play audio, Discord cannot set an arbitrary font for Sitelen Pona, and so on. So now you are familiar with the dictionaries as they existed in 2021. It was at this point that I would start trying to make improvements. Here are the requirements I've settled on for my dictionary. It needs to be compatible with Nimia Lepona, Nimia Liepiku, and Ku. Any information that those provide needs to be available in mine. Although, of course, since Ku costs money, I couldn't simply include all of it. I could only use a smaller segment graciously provided by Jansonia on her website for free. It should include non-essential features that other dictionaries tend to dismiss. So, for instance, if you want to find out the lookupona sign for a given Tokipona word, you shouldn't need to go to a separate resource to access them. It should be easy and relatively open to other people to contribute fixes and translations. If someone else wants to make a new dictionary, they should be able to just take the data from mine, pick and choose what they find important, and just focus on the UI. Updates to the dictionary should propagate automatically, and it should be possible for communities to set up their own ways of accessing the dictionary, for example, using Discord bots. It was about at this point that I realized that my project needed a name, so I just went with a temporary name for this. I coined Linku as a portmanteau of Linlue and Ku, making a nod to dictionaries and interconnectedness. Naturally, no one suggested a better name, so the temporary name became permanent. So with these requirements, a plan began to take shape. Contributors would fill out a Google Sheet, much like they would for Nimia Liepiku, but it would be less pretty and more open to small or anonymous contributions. Then a daily job would pass the sheet from tab-separated values, which by the way is an option that Google Sheets has, into a nice, sensibly structured JSON file, which I called a mirror for the dictionary. Both Nimilinku and Yassimalinku contain all the data, but Nimilinku has to rely on Google and isn't easy to work with, while Yassimalinku is hosted on GitHub and can be imported into your project with just a few lines of code. I then made two front ends that used Yassimalinku, a Discord bot called Ilolinku and a web page called Lipulinku. Ilolinku was largely modeled off of contemporary Discord dictionary bots such as Barista and Qbot. The two key features that I wanted was a command that pulls a definition from Yassima and another command that draws Sitelen Pona. This later expanded to include more writing system stuff, as well as some low-effort commands. Lipulinku is another important addition because unlike the bot, it is available outside Discord, and unlike the bot, you can browse all definitions in order rather than requesting them one by one. The different medium also allows me to easily display more information, so the bot would only show the essential, while the web page can include all the smaller details. Collectively, the bot and the website are supposed to cover all the ways that people prefer to interact with their dictionaries, and dictionary contributions automatically make their way to both. While making Ilolinku, something interesting ended up happening which I couldn't anticipate. Since one of the key commands was rendering Sitelen Pona, I made the choice to support multiple fonts. But it turned out there wasn't a single comprehensive list of existing Tokipona-related fonts. So Jan Ketami and I ended up making one. Eventually we decided bundling all the fonts is valuable in itself. So now you can find our font collection in a separate repository, and the font data is available in Yassima. Now, I want you to understand I am no professional programmer. When I started Linku, I had some experience in all these fields, but putting them all together and comprehending what I'm doing took a lot of my mental energy, despite honestly being quite straightforward. Naturally, the making of Linku was not always smooth sailing, and I want to talk more about that. Early on, I made the decision to put the Discord bot in charge of running the Yassima updater. My reasoning was, the bot was in charge of both reading and writing to Yassima, and both would have to be hosted by me, so it's nice to run both as one entity. The problem is, now the Discord bot has to have write access to Yasima, which only I have, meaning the bot can't be self-hosted by others. Or rather it can, but it requires really silly modifications. This architecture was unacceptable, so I eventually reworked it into what we have today, with the privileged and unprivileged parts of Linku being clearly distinguished. Another issue was not necessarily down to me, but more of an unfortunate reality. When making Ilo Linku, I naturally chose to write it in Python, as that is the language I have had most experience over the past several years, and adapting to anything different would just require even more effort. However, the Python Discord community has just experienced some, let's call it drama. Discord.py, the well-established Discord API wrapper for Python, had been maintained by a single volunteer, and they eventually got fed up with Discord's API updates and archived the project, expecting someone else to pick up the mantle. Except in the following half a year, despite multiple various forks, no single clear successor emerged, and the maintainer eventually ended up unarchiving Discord.py out of nowhere a few months ago. All of this is to say, someone making a Python Discord bot in 2022 has to put their trust in one of several API wrappers, with no guarantee that it will survive over the next year or two. My poor language choices did not stop there. LipoLink was written with Vanilla.js. Naturally, the codebase would be so much cleaner and easier to expand if I had used literally any popular framework. But I just couldn't comprehend them and stuck to the tool I was somewhat used to. Google Sheets was also not without its problems. While I still think it was the right choice for an input system, being quite newcomer-friendly in its UI, I needed a form of moderation, and I chose Google's comment system for that. It proved to be a big mistake. Turns out comment count scales extremely poorly. Sheets with a lot of comments become unbearably laggy, even if the comment is archived. And I can't delete archived comments either, only the person who wrote the comment can. Not to mention, forcing people to use comments meant that I was encumbering people who would have otherwise just copy-pasted a column of translations in. In the end, I had to abandon the old sheet URL and migrate to a new moderation system where hopefully this will not be as much of a concern. And finally, the biggest hassle with Linku was licensing. You see, back when I had started making Linku in December 2021, I knew hardly anything about licensing. But in September 2022, I got into Linux stuff, reading up on everything and watching conferences, and this led me to realize that I really needed to give Linku projects a license, which in turn meant that Nimia Lepona and Nimia Liepiku needed licenses as well, as at the time they were both unlicensed. In the end, I had to reach out to everyone who has ever contributed to any of the 3 dictionaries, asking them to agree to publish their content under the license we have chosen. As you can imagine, this was not fun, especially to me who really prefers to avoid bothering people whenever possible. I was clearly not the only one who found licensing frustrating. Kapisipake ended up shutting down Nimia Liepiku while I was bothering everyone, something I am sure wouldn't have happened otherwise. Nevertheless, in the end, all Linku things now have a license. Now we can use them and know exactly what you can expect and what we expect in return. I want to end this video by acknowledging that I'm really thankful to the community who saw the value in my project and actively promoted in learning spaces. When I had first made a pitch that explained what I wanted Linku to look like back in September 2021, it was almost completely ignored. I guess you can't just look at an ambitious, let's just do everything kind of project and become fully on board with it until you see it fully in action. And I'm also really thankful for the kind people who have contributed to my project in some major way, taking some responsibility off my shoulders. I hope that in the future I can step down from actively managing Linku, and it's these people who make such a future possible. Thank you for listening to me ranting about this, and if you have any more questions or interesting ideas, feel free to ask me on Discord or in the comment section. This has been Kalaasi, Mitawa.